Welcome back. I'm Brian Becker. We're in our Washington, D.C. studio, and we're glad to be joined this week by Susan Lindauer. Susan was very prominent in the news in the first year of the Iraq War when she was arrested, in fact, for being an agent, an unregistered agent of a foreign government, in that case, Iraq. But as you have been able to explain to the public, and as is well known, there was something else behind this story. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
In reality, I was the CIA's primary back channel to the Iraqi government throughout the 1990s. And I was having weekly meetings with the CIA to report what I was doing. And the Iraqi government was fully aware of my identity, so it was not covert at all. But during the build-up to war, in the 2-year period before the war, we had developed a comprehensive peace framework that achieved every U.S. objective that the CIA could possibly devise, including democratic reforms and contracts for American corporations in special priority contracts in telecommunications, hospital equipment, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, transportation. Iraq was offering to buy 1 million American manufactured automobiles every year for 10 years. Imagine America and the world economy if there had been peace and democratic reforms. Saddam Hussein was saying that he would not seek re-election. And so when the government decided to reinvent all the truth, all the facts about Iraqi pre-war intelligence, they had to get me out of the way. And at that point, I was the second person ever indicted on the Patriot Act. I was subjected to secret charges, secret evidence. They accused me of taking $10,000 from the Iraqis, but that was part of the secret evidence. They could not produce any evidence that I actually had done that. And so they said, well, that's, that we're not allowed to show you why that's true. It was just very, very silly. It was ridiculous, but it was also very Kafkaesque.
And what was the final dispensation of your case? How did it end?
I was ordered to spend 1 year in military prison on Carswell Air Force Base. I was denied the right to a trial or hearing. I was simply ordered to surrender. I was held under indictment for 5 years. So even when they released me from prison, they refused to lift the indictment because that kept me gagged from telling people the truth.
And now you are telling the truth. And
yes.
I want to go back to the comprehensive peace agreement that was in existence, at least in broad outline, you said in at least 2 years prior to the March 2003 invasion. It was created at the end of the Clinton administration or at the first period of the Bush administration?
Both. It started at the very end of the Clinton administration, and it was designed to be handover to the new president, whether it would be Democrat or Republican. They were going to the CIA was going to hand the new president a great foreign policy victory. And so this included several components. It was weapons inspections. It included cooperation with the war with anti-terrorism, including allowing the FBI to set up a terrorism task force inside Iraq with authorization to conduct terrorism investigations, interview witnesses, and make arrests, which was an extraordinary thing. It was packed with benefits for American corporations and oil companies. There was no reason to go to war with Iraq to get oil because the Iraq promised that the United States would receive some of the best contracts for oil development. Now, I want to be clear, Iraq never threatened to take away contracts from other countries. But there was so much development to be done that they could honor those contracts to other countries and still bring the United States into play.
Well, clearly, after and even before the first Gulf War, starting in August 1990, the United States imposed economic sanctions on Iraq. They were airtight sanctions. They were comprehensive. They had a devastating character. After the first Gulf War ended at the end of February 1991, those sanctions were not lifted. They were, in fact, tightened. And according to the United Nations' own statistics, as many as 8,000 Iraqis, perhaps 5,000 of whom were children under the age of 5, were perishing each and every month as a consequence of the absence of food and medicine and other things needed to sustain life. why did the United States, if you're saying that that was ending with a change in the Iraqi government's orientation by the end of the decade, why did the United States shift and move into a posture of preparing for and then carrying out a full-scale military invasion?
It was a devastating mistake, as we can all see, and it was a pointless waste of our military, our middle-class tax dollars. We've spent $4 trillion since 9/11 on war. And that's separate from veterans benefits or the regular Pentagon budgets. And we've increased the military spending by 81% since 9/11. And obviously war is a big business for the United States. But in fact, there was no reason to do this at all. Iraq was even offering democratic reforms, whereby the opposition, they actually had a very creative strategy. The Iraqis invited the exiles to return to Baghdad and live in expanded embassy compounds, which would be considered sovereign territory. For your international audience would know this. Embassies are considered sovereign territory of the home country. And they would be protected by embassy security, and they would have the rights to move around the city and have organized political campaigns and political parties and have opposition newspapers, and there would be elections within 18 months of their return. It was very substantial. What the CIA had created, it's ironic because the CIA was accused of doing a very poor job before the war, but really that was only because the politicians in Washington did not have the courage of their convictions to take responsibility for their actions.
Well, let me ask you, let's go back and sort of roll the clock back and cover some of the history that was, well, because it's history, it's less well known now, but in December 1998, on December 12th or 13th, 1998, the United States began what was called Operation Desert Fox, which was a 4-day bombing campaign of Iraq. At the same time, the weapons inspectors were taken out of Iraq. Now, at that point, the United States knew pretty well what weapons existed or didn't exist in Iraq. They knew, for instance, that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction.
They had no weapons of mass destruction.
That even the biological and chemical weapons program that had existed was ended by 1995.
Yes.
When the Bush administration came in, Colin Powell seemed to indicate that there was some progress on the issue of sanctions. He said, we're going to recraft sanctions to make them, quote, smart sanctions, meaning not targeting the Iraqi people who had suffered so much. So again, I want to ask you, what caused this shift? Was it because of the role of the neoconservatives in the Bush administration? Was it because of 9/11? What caused the shift?
Well, let me tell you that what caused the shift to peace, which was a covert peace action, was that the international community had reached a point of such depth of loathing of the sanctions that the CIA recognized the sanctions were going to collapse. And so at that point it became that the status quo could not continue because the international community would not allow them to continue.
So you saw Iraq's neighbors starting to violate the sanctions. There was a lot of cross-border trade in spite of the sanctions.
Which was very good. And I will tell you that what did it for the CIA was a German airlift into Baghdad International Airport. And they brought medical supplies, doctors, and many countries began to follow suit. And they began to run an airlift like they had in Berlin. And it was a beautiful thing. I was a person who deeply opposed the sanctions from the very beginning. And so that's why I had been asked to be a back channel to the Iraqis. And
the Iraqis knew you because of your work against economic sanctions.
Exactly. And the CIA knew that they were co-opting me. But I agreed to be co-opted because I wanted to do everything that I possibly could to make this terrible thing end. And my contribution was, ironically, anti-terrorism. And one of the other lies that has been told is that the United States did not know about 9/11. We did know about 9/11. I was personally ordered in April and May of 2001 to warn my contacts through my back channel at the Iraqi embassy that we were demanding any intelligence they had on airplane hijacking conspiracies with a target of the World Trade Center. And we knew about this for months. And I was ordered to threaten them that if the 9/11 attack occurred, and it turned out that Iraq had not provided us with an intelligence that they did possess, then there would be a war with Iraq.
Let me go back and ask you to repeat that one more time. So you're saying that in April and May 2001, a few months before September 11th, that you received instructions from the CIA to communicate with the Iraqi embassy regarding any knowledge that they might have regarding airplanes that would attack the World Trade Center.
Yes, a specific hijacking conspiracy and that would target the World Trade Center. And I was told to say that if we did not, that if Iraq did possess the intelligence and failed to give it to us, then there would be a war. And Iraq's response was, well, we've already offered to allow the FBI to send a task force into Baghdad. And they had offered this in February. This related to the bombing of the USS Cole in October 2000. And there had been some people from the USS Cole who'd been inside Iraq who had been deported, and Iraq had provided that information through my back channel. And the CIA's response to that was, well, we demand that you allow the FBI to set up a task force there. And so Iraq had acquiesced as part of the peace proposal of the weapons inspections, and anti-terrorism was already in place. And so when we threatened Iraq with war in April and May of 2001, beginning in those months, Iraq's response was, well, go ahead and send in the FBI. If you believe that there's a terrorist conspiracy, and you're welcome to come here and try to find it if you think there's anything here. And the Bush administration immediately backed off. However, the threats continued through the summer. I was ordered repeatedly to push the Iraqis for any intelligence on this attack. So you can see why I was not popular with the Bush administration when they decided that they were going to cover up 9/11 in Iraq.
So they were alarmed about the prospect of an attack.
Well, I think they were definitely exploiting it. There was hype about it. There's something called plausible deniability. And we were subjected to that as well, because I was never given enough information that would have allowed our team to stop the 9/11 attack. And we had lots of experience doing anti-terrorism work. That was our primary focus. Saddam Hussein was actually one of the best sources that America had on anti-terrorism throughout the 90s. Again, the real story is very different than what Americans were told.
How does the situation look looking back for you? Now we are on the eve of 2012. Looking back at this last 7-8 years, what's been the impact on Iraq? What's been the impact on the region?
Hideous, catastrophic stupidity, absolute stupidity. And of course, the Iraqi economy is destroyed for the next 100 years. I do not see them recovering. The oil pipeline infrastructure has been so badly damaged that it's now cost prohibitive to redevelop it. And it will, so we have lost essentially the second largest oil producing country. It's mostly off limits to us. Huge mistake. There is no democracy in Iraq. When Malakai's government could not win the election fairly, they assassinated their the winners of the election. They barred candidates from the ballot. There's no democracy there now.
The one thing the Maliki government is doing is buying a lot of weapons from the United States. There's just been an agreement to purchase $11 billion in advanced fighter craft. Do you think that that Iraq, even in its weakened state, is more or less in an American sphere of influence, or how do you see the constellation?
No, I do not think that. Malachi is very weak. He is hated in his country. He is a puppet of the United States. The country is destroyed, and the people are overwhelmed. And he may be able to get away with his tyranny for the next 20 years and become the new Saddam, but I think that, but his ability to deliver the Iraqi people to the cause of the United States, we have lost the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. They are with Iran. If we were to try to go to war and use Iraq as a base, for launching base for attacks against Iran, most of the Iraqi people would rise against us, and the insurgency would resume en masse, and they would side with Iran in defending the Iranian government.
So
Absolutely.
So the Maliki government compared to the Saddam government, you said you consider it a puppet.
Is much worse, is much more vicious. Saddam Hussein was able to deliver food to his people under sanctions. Maliki can't do that. He's not capable of performing any services. Saddam Hussein was able to motivate the people to rebuild the country after sanctions. Even in the worst situation, Saddam could get the people to be proud Iraqis and independent Iraqis. Maliki can't do anything. He's not a leader that they have any respect for. He's a puppet of the United States.
How do you think the Obama administration views that?
I don't think it
Obama
matters.
view it the way you view it?
I think that Obama, that the American government is still under the legend of the American government. I think that the war has obviously diminished our capacity, our leadership capacity dreadfully. We cannot motivate those people to support us. That's the problem. Maliki needs us, but the people hate us. And the people, if we attack Iran, the Iraqi people will rise to Iran's defense. They will not say, oh, we want to protect those Americans. They will attack us. If we try to use Iraq as a base against Iran, the Iraqi people will join with Iran.
There's growing tension right at the moment as we're speaking. It's an escalating tension between the United States and Iran. Mm-hmm. The United States has used the report of Amano, the IAEA new Secretary General, the one who replaced, the chairman, who replaced Baradi, who suggested that Iran is on the path, or may be on the path, there's no specific evidence, towards nuclearizing a weapons program, and using that as a pretext to impose harsh economic sanctions on Iran, including perhaps its central bank. There's a rising chorus of voices in the U.S. Congress in the same way. Iran has also said that if sanctions are imposed, or at least some Iranian leaders, that the shipping lanes in the Straits of Hormuz, where much of the world's oil that comes from the Middle East is shipped, that shipping lane could be closed down. So you see that we're climbing the escalation ladder.
Yes.
Where do you see it going in terms of the U.S. attitude and posture and policy towards Iran?
I am very afraid that Iran is very serious about its nuclear program. They've also said that they're developing nuclear energy and power for its public. And I wish that we could move them in a different direction, at least for that.
But they have that right.
Sure, they have that right. They absolutely do have that right. I am very concerned that we are heading towards a major worldwide confrontation with Iran. And if there was anything that we can do right now, there needs to be peace efforts, back-channel discussions involving Russia, possibly China, even if we have to give some power to some of these other governments to come in and help solve this problem. We must solve this problem.
You can tell the political temperature here in Washington is such that there's very few, if any, political leaders who are saying, let's tone it down, let's have more diplomacy, let's have either back channel or front channel sort of negotiations. I think it's clear that Iran has been willing to have a negotiated resolution. Their position of others, Brazil and Turkey, who have tried to intervene and who have been rebuffed by the United States. Where does it all end? Iran clearly has the right as a signer to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to develop nuclear energy for civilian purposes.
Yes.
The
Yes, it
IAEA
does.
has inspectors and monitors and cameras there. They're watching that, and they are basically saying Iran is conforming to their requirements. So it doesn't appear that the U.S. seeks a resolution, seeks a negotiated settlement, that they have another plan.
Oh, I think it's a disastrous plan. I think if we go to war with Iran, it will destroy the United States economy even worse than we're already in. It will be World War III.
Well,
It will be World War III, and we cannot let this
Iran
happen.
has 80 million people. I mean, in an advanced military. Do you think, as we saw in Iraq, that economic sanctions are designed as a long-term sort of weakening of the country in preparation for a military conflict?
I think that sanctions are a terrible mistake because whoever inherits the country inherits a destroyed economy that's not capable of rebounding. And that's why the Iraqi exiles have reaped what they've sown. But in terms of Iran, I would I'm one of those people who believes that it would be World War III. I believe it would destroy the United States economy in total. I believe it would destroy the global economy in total. And I believe that we are spending ourselves into the ground as it is. The war in Iraq has cost us so much prestige and influence in the world. It's gone now. We used to be able to go into let me just tell you this, to put this in context. When I was a back channel to the Iraqi embassy and to the Libya house, because I also did the Lockerbie negotiations with Libya, when the United States wanted something, we would go in and we would dictate the terms. And pretty much you had to agree with us if you wanted to get somewhere for yourself. That is no longer true. The United States is one player with other players, China, Europe, Russia, and we're not on that pedestal any longer. Now, that doesn't mean we can't do a lot of damage in a place like Iran. And I just pray we never go to this war. We must stop this. The international peace community must do something to intervene and stand up. And I think it's starting to happen because there's no action without a reaction. And those of us who are watching this build up, this escalation, as all the things you pointed out are true, is provoking a reaction from the peace community. And I hope that we will demand that there must be some discussions with Iran to try to figure out a way to get this back down and bring the tensions back down.
The situation in the Middle East has become so tense. There's, of course, the Arab Spring on one side, people fighting for democratic change. The United States is a very interested party and as a power that seeks hegemony in the region, has also used the Arab Spring as the slogans of democracy and freedom as a way to intervene. In the case of Libya, that was certainly the case. The U.S. used some of the same slogans to, along with Britain and France, to carry out the NATO bombing campaign of Libya, and they're intervening directly in Syria. Do you think the United States feels at this point that they can sort of control the outcome by an interventionist orientation, or are they just playing catch-up?
Well, I think that Libya was a disaster. The Libyan resistance is very strong. There was no NATO bombing amounted to war crimes against the Libyan people. Gaddafi had 85% support rate. And the people now are demanding that they keep all of Gaddafi's programs. They don't want to change those programs. And the Islamic radicals who've taken over Libya actually control no territory. They have the control of the government and they have NATO's backing, but the people in the communities all through the country are fighting them. I get daily reports from all over the country of Libya, and there's war everywhere.
Right, you can see that Libya has become unstable. It's got a huge amount of oil.
Somalia.
Somalia. I mean, when when the neoconservatives took the White House in 2001,
Yes.
and that was the foreign policy team for Bush, the Cheney, Wolfowitz, that whole grouping, they identified governments that they wanted to carry out regime change. In addition to Afghanistan after 9/11, there was Iraq, there was Syria, there was Lebanon in terms of the configuration, Iran, Somalia. You see that in almost each of these instances, there is a direct continuing U.S. intervention for the purpose of regime change. Now, Bush...
But regime change is not necessarily a good thing in itself, unless you have a plan for who's going to, how the regime is going to evolve into something positive.
I understand.
And Libya is a disaster.
Well, let me ask you, and we only have 1 minute left,
Sorry.
or about 70 seconds, actually.
Okay.
So, given that, and given the fact that this was inaugurated by the neoconservatives under Bush, but now they're gone. The Republicans are no longer in the White House. It's Obama, a liberal, centrist Democrat. And yet it seems to be the same policy. In our last 45 seconds, what is driving U.S. foreign policy in spite of the different parties and personalities?
Israel.
Okay. Explain, if you would, in the last few seconds.
I believe that there's a strong motivation to attack any government that strongly opposes the Israeli government. And certainly Gaddafi was one of those. And Saddam was also one of those. I think that it is backfiring on all of us. Right now, Libya has a radical Islamic government. I think that the White House policy has been very misguided. They thought that democracy would bring a more modernist approach, but Arabs have their own culture and their own values and their own religion, which is very conservative and fundamentalist, and so democracy is shifting power to them. And the Israelis may have hoped that they would benefit from destabilizing their enemy, Gaddafi. However, what they've done is they've raised into power people who are even more adamantly against them. So I would tell everyone, please, no more interventions.
Susan Lindauer, thank you very much for joining us. That concludes this episode. We'll be back next time.